Celebrating its 50th birthday this past week was the Doctor Who story from Season 9, The Curse of Peladon, which broadcast its first part broadcast on the 29th of January 1972. And to commemorate this occasion, Big Finish have released a box set dedicated to the planet Peladon. For those of you who may not know about the classic series, Peladon was a feudal-style planet that appeared twice during the Jon Pertwee era in The Curse of Peladon and The Monster of Peladon, in Series 9 and Series 11 respectively. At the time, these two were stories which were a political allegory talking about the United Kingdom joining what is now known as the European Union. It was about a corruption within an institution where the Galactic Federation, which were bringing Peladon, this feudal, old-fashioned planet, into their midst. And it's honestly, I do not remember much of these stories. I remember watching The Curse of Peladon and The Monster of Peladon during repeats on UK TV Gold in around 2006 to 2007. So I don't really remember too clearly much of what was happening in those stories, other than Jon Pertwee singing a lullaby and David Troughton appearing as King Peladon while he was in his 20s, and he is now reprising the role 50 years later in his 70s, but he is not alone. He is joined by the 6th Doctor, played by Colin Baker, the 8th Doctor, played by Paul McGann, and Alex Kingston, playing Professor River Song. And this is a quartet of stories. They don't all cross over with each other. The first story is called The Ordeal of Peladon by Jonathan Barnes and Robert Valentine, and it is a King Peladon story. The second one, The Poison of Peladon by Lizzie Hopley, takes place after the reign of King Peladon, and we have Queen Thalia. And you've got River Song joining forces with Alpha Centauri, who's this little blob, one-eyed creature here who is fondly remembered from the classic series, and also has a cameo in The Empress of Mars, the Series 10 story. We've got The Death of Peladon by Mark Wright, which takes place after the rule of Queen Thalia, or at least towards the end of the rule, and also The Truth of Peladon by Tim Foley, where the 8th Doctor is here, way after, towards the end of, the reign of Peladon, and towards, the end of the civilization. Rachel Cox says that we stand Alpha Centauri. We do. Why? The chat is lighting up with Alpha Centauri. I'm very glad that this character is so beloved. Was a very memorable and fun creature back in the 1970s to also appear in The Empress of Mars as well. What we've got for this box set is, in the behind the scenes, they were trying to sell it as this is Big Finish's answer to The Crown, this sort of royal epic drama that takes place over decades and years and generations, and that's what this is trying to do, and I understand it going there thematically. And Flipsy says also a surprise cameo in the first story. Yes, The Ordeal of Peladon has a major surprise cameo that I did not expect, but it was minor, but it was very fun and really, really enjoyed it. And these characters do not cross over, but there's a running theme going through all four box sets, and that is the same structure, more or less. All four stories, The Ordeal, Poison, Death, and Truth of Peladon, in that order, all seem to have the same story, where the main character turns up, whether it's the King of Peladon, 6th, 8th, or River Song, and about halfway through they realise, wait a tick, the water on Peladon seems to be a bit polluted, and then let's try and fix this issue, and then we find out in the next story whether or not the issue has been fixed, and these massive systemic issues that might be running through Peladon. Basically, when you've got this aristocratic, this elite upper class society, which is having parties while the actual peasantry, the population, die of disease and famine and poverty. Which is why you can kind of understand how a story based on Peladon, the political undertones or political overtones are just, it's all over the place. It's imbued in the material. So let's go through these stories quickly, one at a time, though. The Ordeal of Peladon by Jonathan Barnes and Robert Valentine. I really enjoyed this opening. This was a fun opening story where the King of Peladon is hearing these stories about this soothsayer, this mysterious person who is having prophecies, who's got their own little cult, basically, this mini cult in Peladon, and they're worried that it might usurp the actual monarchy of Peladon. If people are going to be listening to this soothsayer, maybe we should listen to what they have to say and see if they're a danger, see if they're a threat. And during this mission, the King of Peladon is joined by an ice warrior, an ice lord, Lord, I should say, voiced by Nicholas Briggs, who is a representative from the Galactic Federation who is going for like an impromptu, unscheduled meeting, a surprise meeting. So what we had for the Ordeal of Peladon was a buddy story, where we had a dynamic that is not too dissimilar from Principal Skinner and Super Nintendo Chalmers from The Simpsons, where you've got the King of Peladon who's trying to put on a brave front, and the representative from the Galactic Federation who's trying to figure out what's happening on Peladon at the moment. It was really fun, but the Ice Warrior in question, though, is just bored of bureaucracy, and he's like, oh, this is actually a nice little mini adventure. Okay, this is the most unpredictable meeting I've ever been to. Let's run with it. It was really fun. It was a great opening as well. And I also wish that David Troughton appeared in all of the stories in this box set, because he's a lovely presence. He was really great in this role, returning to it like 50 years later. It was great. It was a fun story with a brilliant surprise cameo towards the end that I'm not going to spoil on this live stream. Incidentally, the Ice Warriors in this box set are characterized significantly better than the last box set they appeared in earlier in January, 40 Volume 1, the 5th Doctor box set, which is an Ice Warrior story, but they were so boring there. But here, they're fun. They're a fun presence, and Nicholas Briggs voices them brilliantly. Anyway, the Poison of Peladon, River Song is trying to figure out what's happening on Peladon. She infiltrates the court ship while pretending to be a high priestess, and she becomes best friend with Alpha Centauri, who is voiced impeccably well by Jane Goddard, who does her best Alpha Centauri impression. It was a lot of fun, and the dynamic between these two, I could listen to an entire box set with River Song and Alpha Centauri just flirting with each other all day long. We'll play a clip real quick.
You've seen no sign of trouble, then, among the people?
I did expect it. The constant fight against environmental disaster must be exhausting. But no, they seem happy with the improvements she's made. Peladon seems surprisingly peaceful.
You have a calming influence, Cantica. I can see why the tattooed priest is drawn to you.
Flashing tattoos at each other, Centauri? That's third date stuff.
I spotted Father Mendicant changing shirts. He's covered in them. I think I alarmed him somewhat.
Oh, I don't think much alarms Mendicant, Centauri.
Oh, please, call me Alpha. Which do you prefer? He, she, or they?
It really all depends who I'm with.
Oh, be careful, Cantica. You'll bring the mountain down on our heads.
I've said in the past that I'm not a big fan of Alex Kingston as River Song when she goes for the super flirtatious stuff, but the fact that she's flirting and is best friends with Alpha Centauri gives it a new lease on life. That's so fun. Peter Harrington doesn't sound like Alpha. It captures the spirit of the character, and Alpha is so fun across this box set. They appear in like 2 stories, but they make those impressions count. That they were so they were like so they're great in the stories in the 70s, and they're great in this box set as well. It's a great dynamic between the two, where you've got this sort of like political thriller where River Song is trying to figure out who is trying to poison the Queen, trying to figure out what is happening with Peladon's water supply, and the fact that they've teamed her up with Alpha Centauri, who seems like the absolute like polar opposite character to River Song, but they get along so well, and Alpha Centauri is secretly maybe possibly a badass. It gave this story such a unique feel to it. It was a really wonderful story by Lizzie Hopley, and I also love throughout the entirety of the box set just the world building that goes into Peladon, like how much we learn about their underground societies, and also the different cliques and the different areas of Peladon as well. There's great ambience as well, terrific sound design of the caves. Agadors make multiple appearances as well over the course of the box set as well. Which means that when we get to The Death of Peladon by Mark Wright, which is the 3rd story, it's a 6th Doctor Amell story, and personally, I thought this was, like, no disrespect, of course, to Mark Wright, who wrote it, but I thought that this was actually the least interesting story of the box set. It was basically just a Sixth Doctor and Mel story that just happened to take place on Peladon. It works in terms of the grand scheme of the box set, where it's setting up everything towards the climactic story, the truth of Peladon, with the Eighth Doctor. So it makes sense thematically and it works, but there wasn't that. As a story on its own, it felt pretty safe. It felt a little bit run-of-the-mill, the Sixth Doctor and Mel arrive on Peladon and there's a conspiracy. They find a murdered body in the mines and there's a mine collapse and they have to get rid of the explosives and they have to figure out just what is going on with the water supply. Part of me thinks that if you were to put all 4 of the Peladon stories like on a single audio timeline, would they talk about the poisoned water in Peladon? Would they talk about that at exactly the same point? And I think they might do. They're structured very, very similarly, but they all lead to different climaxes and different conclusions. But like I said, while the death of Peladon was a little bit pedestrian, it kind of makes sense within the context of the broader Peladon box set, where these same issues, these same problems are occurring and not being fixed and being covered up over the course of numerous generations, where you might have to think, actually, maybe it's not individuals here, maybe it's a systemic problem, maybe there's these massive, huger issues in Peladon that need to be fixed, and maybe just turning up and sorting out the villain of the week isn't really going to solve anything. Which leads us to The Truth of Peladon by Tim Foley, which is a wonderful Eighth Doctor story where Paul McGann ends up working for one of Peladon's last great seamstresses, Arla, who is voiced terrifically by Mira Sile. She's one of the last great seamstresses of Peladon who has to put together a new outfit for the new ruler's coronation, but they don't know who the coronation is. They don't even know who's going to be coronated. And the Doctor becomes their apprentice, and it just becomes this really nice low-key story for the first half of the Eighth Doctor helping Arla put together this outfit for the upcoming coronation. It's wonderful. They'll play a clip.
I did some midnight reading about the old traditions. They used to stitch in a map of the stars to reflect what the ruler will see on coronation night from the royal chamber. The stars behind them, the stars before them. They are Peladon, centre of the universe. Well, of course, astronomical models are a little more truthful these days, but I thought it was a nice touch. And exactly what Chancellor Baroque is after.
And if the Chancellor is happy, the new ruler is happy.
Something like that, yes.
So what do we need then? An astral convergence map?
Well, yes, actually. The observatory can provide us with a projection. I thought you said you weren't a man of learning.
You'd be surprised what a fool like me can pick up.
At the Loom House?
At the Loom House?
You're bad at lying, Doctor.
That's the youthful face, isn't it? Betrays my honesty.
I really ought not to trust you.
And yet, deep down, you know I mean you no harm. And you know I can help.
The first half of that story is just this wonderful, it's this wonderful two-hander between Arla and the Eighth Doctor, talking about her lot in life, and that Arla is working as the seamstress and what she's trying to do to bring glory upon the new leading ruler of Peladon. And Mike Zacharias Gill says, Eighth Doctor, stop talking in that sexy voice. If you want to hear Paul McGann sing a lullaby to Agador, you're going to hear the Eighth Doctor sing a lullaby to Agador. So do we get a new Haroon, was at any point? We do, from Paul McGann. Also, Howard Carter's music, the theme that he gives this box set that opens every story, mwah, Howard Carter can do no wrong for Big Finish. Wonderful music all the way through. The first half of The Truth of Peladon is this really lovely, slow-paced two-hander between these two brilliant actors. And then the second half, I'm hesitant to say too much in case I spoil it, or I don't want to give away the story's hands too much. But basically, the Eighth Doctor pulls the rug out from under the audience and also Arla. And he does it in such a brilliant way, where all of the themes from the ordeal of Peladon, the poison of Peladon, and the death of Peladon just hit you like a train, where the entire political undercurrents and all of the subtext that's been happening throughout all of the Peladon stories has just been building to this monologue that the Eighth Doctor gives talking to Arla about what's really going wrong on Peladon, how the system has managed to maintain itself for so long. And obviously it's a bit heavy-handed, and I think anyone listening to a Doctor Who Big Finish release about Peladon is going to already be completely on board with its ideology and the messages and everything that it's talking about. Like, it's going to be preaching to the choir, but Paul McGann sells it so phenomenally, and I think it's one of my favourite Eighth Doctor stories that I've listened to just generally. And a brilliant line where he says, he says something along the lines of, "I've fought many monsters across the universe, but the worst one is apathy." And it's that line just encapsulated everything that this box set was going for. I would be surprised if at the end of 2022 that this Peladon box set was not in my top 10. It was an incredibly strong listen. Like, it kind of fluctuates a little bit in quality throughout, but it hits the consistent themes. You're worried if it's going to stick the landing, and it absolutely does with that ending. And Paul McGann, Eighth Doctor, the great romantic who has sort of been beaten down by this society, his favourite planet, watching it just make the same mistakes over generations and different incarnations where he's visiting his favourite planet over decades and centuries, and just seeing it not fix itself. And it was such a great box set for that. It was a really great listen. I think the whole is worth more than the sum of its parts, but the sum of its parts are still really strong. The Poison of Peladon and The Truth of Peladon are the head and shoulders standouts of the box set, though. River Song and Alpha Centauri duo, brilliant and inspired, and Arla and the Eighth Doctor's dynamic over the course of The Truth of Peladon, brilliantly executed. And yeah, David Troughton was fun as well. I think it says a lot where the weakest story, the Sixth Doctor and Mel's story, The Death of Peladon, is still a pretty solid story, but that's the weakest of the set. If that's the weakest, you've got a really strong box set. And these are lengthy stories as well. These are like 17 minutes long each. Like, normally your typical Big Finish box set is a trilogy of hour-long stories. We've got a quartet of 70-minute stories, and Theo's here. See, Theo is a big Third Doctor fan, so I think he'd appreciate the Peladon stories. Oh, thank you, Theo, licking my thumb. Mwah. You've got an adoring public. Hee. Honestly, as someone who even just has like a passing familiarity with those 70s stories that are 50 years old, this is a great celebration of those stories on their 50th birthday. And it was still just a great political box set, a political thriller. Radioactive Cheese now nuclear reactor flavor. Awesome username. Holy shit, Peladon stories are 70 minutes each. Jesus. I think the shortest one is The Truth of Peladon, but even then that's just over an hour long. But yeah, but the Peladon stories in the 1970s came at an interesting time for the show. Like, not just the fact that they were talking about the United Kingdom joining the European Union. Or like, it wasn't called the European Union then, but it was later named that. Was that it was an Earthbound era of the show for the most part. And then all of a sudden, the Doctor gets his freedom, or he manages to get to Peladon, and you get these really strange and creepy, strange and odd kilter creatures like Alpha Centauri. This was a really strong box set. It really surprised me. I was not expecting much from it. I guess remembered conflict of interest, I guess, but I literally forgot until I guess mentioned now. Dominic Martin, a friend of the live stream, is an assistant producer on this box set, but like I just completely forgot until now, but disclosures, of course. Congrats to Dominic, of course, and on the whole creative team for doing a terrific job on a box set that did not need to be as good as it was. The Ice Warriors are fun. River Song is a surprising standout, but the MVP here in terms of like Doctors and stories is Paul McGann, who just lets rip in that final story. This was a great box set. Highly recommend picking this up. If you are someone who loves the Peladon stories from the 1970s, this is a must listen. But if you're someone who's maybe on the fence, I'd encourage you to check it out. Paul McGann has a soothing voice. One second. Who wants to listen to Paul McGann singing? Trev Apocalypse raised his hand. Good. The audience is now pregnant.